Great to see you all this morning. Thanks for being here for this Bible class hour. We're studying in Genesis, and we are wrapping up chapter 41. We won't go back and retell all that history, but you remember Joseph is in Egypt, and it is in chapter 41 where he interprets Pharaoh's dream about the coming 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And of course, Pharaoh appoints him to be in charge of all the business relative to that. In fact, as we said last week and clearly stated, he is raised to absolute second only to the Pharaoh. He has ultimate power in Egypt, which is really a significant thing because at that time, Egypt very likely was the most powerful and richest and most prosperous nation in the world at that time. And so he is a man of really high rank. After all the trouble, I mean, you catalog all the bad things that happened to Joseph. Envied by his brothers, sold into slavery. In Potiphar's house, though he was a very great servant in Potiphar's house, Potiphar's wife lies about him. He gets thrown in the dungeon. Remember we talked about the word dungeon. He's in the dungeon. He interprets the butler and baker's dreams. And the butler is restored to his prominent place in Pharaoh's court, but the butler forgets him. He languishes for 2 more years in prison. So, I mean, just bad after bad after bad happens, but now he is finally being treated justly, and he's being treated magnificently. He's clothed in fine apparel. He rides in Pharaoh's chariot. Everything has turned now. And so the final questions that we had relative to all of this, let's just talk about a couple of things, then we'll move on and continue the storyline. In your study guide, the question was asked, since God may take years to fulfill a purpose, and those years may be filled with struggles, setbacks, sorrow, and great trials, what qualities does one need to reach the desired end? I don't know. How are you going to answer that, Tom?
Go through the book of Revelation. Basically, Jesus tells the same thing. Continue on, strive, know that, what's promised is already going to happen. Basically, he tells you, endure to the end, and the reward will give it to you.
Okay, so endurance, patience. I would add to that commitment, faithfulness, loyalty to God. I mean, so now some of us are getting on in years now. I mean, when's the payoff going to hit? So I've been poor and sick my whole life. Am I going to ever get rich and healthy? I mean, is there a payoff? Well, no. The fact of the matter is it may never come, right, in this lifetime. Because we think of some very famous servants of God who did not prosper materially or in this present world sense. Jesus, of course, the ultimate example. Jesus was never rich, didn't live long, suffered horribly at the hands of unjust men. So the point is we need to be patient. We need to be patient and endure and be faithful. And we believe that God blesses us when we do that, but it may not be with health and prosperity in this world. There is that health and wealth gospel that a lot of denominational folks teach and preach that we think is without basis in the Bible. The Bible does not promise that to us. In the case of Joseph, it happened. There was a this lifetime payoff, and he is in second highest position probably in the whole world of that day now, after all the trouble that he had faced. But it didn't necessarily have to happen that way. I mean, no person is guaranteed that it will happen that way. But of course, the ultimate reward is in heaven. That's what we're striving for. This is all temporal. No matter what happens here, it's all temporal. We're striving for the goal of heaven and eternity. But just like Joseph, be patient, keep working, don't give up. Above all things, be faithful to God. There is a reward. It may not come now, but it will come. Any thoughts on that? Anybody? All right. Brian, did you have a thought? Okay. This is like an auction, by the way. If you scratch your ear or if you get called on. Monty.
Paul talked about the sufferings of this life was meaningless in comparison with the glories of the reward in heaven. And so no matter what this life brings us, the glories of the reward in heaven is a vast, to use the term in a physical way, a vast fortune or great riches, more than we can possibly ever imagine. So this is just a process of getting to that, living in such a way to be able to be blessed with that. And if we've got that, we won't, I don't think personally that if we make it to heaven, whatever happened here probably is not going to come to our mind, because we're going to be so overwhelmed by being in the presence of God that this is just, it's gone.
Yeah. I'm always reminded of this. Gordon, did you have a thought?
Go ahead and make a comment.
I'm always reminded of the story of and I've probably told it to you before, this guy, they saw this beautiful estate and, big mansion house and beautiful grounds and a nice lake off to the side. And the one guy says to the other, he said, man, I'd love to have a place like that, wouldn't you? And the other guy says, no, I probably wouldn't want that. And he said, well, why not? And he said, well, then it'd be hard for me to remember this world is not my home. One of the things about being abundantly prosperous, and we're pretty prosperous people, don't forget, and one of the problems about being abundantly prosperous is that we can get too attached to this world, the here and now, and kind of lose sight of that ultimate goal. And that, by the way, is the follow-up question here about Joseph. And I'll get right to you, Gordon. Concerning Joseph, the question is asked, even though Joseph had clung to God during times of adversity, his exaltation provided another trial of his faithfulness. How did he handle that? So, yeah, there's trials to being poor and oppressed. There's trials associated with it. But there's trials associated with being rich and abundantly prosperous. I mean, that's not without its trials too. And so, this life is going to be full of trials. No matter what your status is, you're going to have to be faithful. Gordon?
Joseph was, he was so smart and wise about all this work he did for Pharaoh. And of course, he just, Pharaoh was one that benefited the most out of it, but eventually, Joseph's family, was able to come.
Yeah. I hadn't really thought about it that way, but Pharaoh, it turned out pretty good for Pharaoh too in his whole business. Monty.
Another lesson we can learn in that regard is Joseph, even though he was number 2 in the world at that point, basically, understood he still had a master. Pharaoh was still ultimately in charge, so he was working for him. And that's what we need to understand, is we've all got a master. No matter what our position here is on this earth, we're still got a master, and we're ultimately responsible to God and to be obedient to him and to serve him in a way that's profitable to him. Not to us necessarily, but to him, just like Joseph had to serve in a way that was profitable to Pharaoh.
Yeah. The author, how did Joseph handle the prosperity or the abundance, the exaltation that came to him? Well, we haven't really read that yet, and we're going to proceed to read that. But the point is that will present a test to Joseph also, because now he's in a position. Now I can get even. Now I can make the people pay who did me wrong. And he would be in a great spot to be vengeful and really dole out the payback to the people who had mistreated him through all these years. And of course, we're going to see that he doesn't do that. And so, he, as we've been saying ever since we started reading about Joseph here in our Genesis studies, in Genesis, in everything that we read about Joseph, he is an excellent Bible character. As we pointed out, I mean, you'd be hard-pressed to put your finger on one bad thing you could say about Joseph. He was good throughout, and that's really incredible. All right, so let's continue on into chapter 42. Of course, the chapter 41 ends at verse 57. all countries came to Egypt to Joseph for to buy corn, because that the famine was so sore in all the land. So this wasn't just a famine affecting Egypt. This was everywhere. And we keep reading in chapter 42, Genesis 42, verse 1. Now when Jacob saw that there was corn in Egypt, Jacob said to his sons, "Why do you look one upon another?" And he said, "Behold, I have heard that there is corn in Egypt. Get you down thither, and buy for us from thence, that we may live and not die." And Joseph's 10 brethren went down to buy corn in Egypt, but Benjamin, Joseph's brother, Jacob sent not with his brethren, for he said, "Lest peradventure mischief befall him." And the sons of Israel came to buy corn among those that came, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. And Joseph was the governor over the land, and he it was that sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces to the earth. And Joseph saw his brethren, and he knew them, but made himself strange unto them, and spake roughly unto them. And he said unto them, "Whence come ye?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan to buy food." And Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew not him. Okay, so again, notice how this is working out providentially. And we talked some already about the providence of God in this matter. And that's what's happening here, right? The fact that his brothers come to Egypt, they're not miraculously directed there. It wasn't a miracle that made his brothers come to Egypt. It was, we're hungry. We need food. There's food in Egypt. Let's go buy some food. So that was a normal, there wasn't anything supernatural about that, but it was clearly God's working, right? And so this whole storyline carries lots of indications of God's providence. That's what we call, when God brings about his purposes just by using natural means, we believe that he works that way. We believe he works that way in our world today. When he brings to pass his will, not supernaturally, but using natural means, we call that providence. And there's lots of indication of providence here. Tom?
Look at, the first verse for Jacob saw there was grain in Egypt. He's climbed up on the mountain and looked, that saw there, did God miraculously show him that there was grain down in Egypt? It's more likely that there were caravans that came.
Sure.
This was the news carrying grain back.
This was word of mouth, right?
Word of mouth.
Because they didn't have 24-hour news coverage like we do. But if everybody's starving to death and there's a report that begins to circulate, there's some food in Egypt, that's going to spread like wildfire. That's going to get everywhere. And so, again, not supernatural, not a revelation. He didn't receive a revelation. He just heard what everybody was hearing. There's food in Egypt. So, question 2 I thought was interesting. Do a little math here. How many years had passed since Joseph had seen his brothers? Okay, we know from chapter 37 that he was 17 years old when he was sold into slavery by his brothers. And we know in the chapter we just read, chapter 41, verse 46, that he's 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh. So 17 to 30, 13 years, right? Now there had already been the 7 years of plenty, 13 plus 7, 20. And then skip ahead just to chapter 45. In chapter 45, it says at verse 6, when he identifies himself to his brothers, he says, "For these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and there yet are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest." So they were 2 years. So 13 plus 7 years of plenty, 20, and they were 2 years into the famine cycle, 22 years. I think that's the right answer. Do you agree? Now, we're going to talk here in a minute about how come they didn't recognize him. I think there's going to be several factors that they don't recognize, why they don't recognize him. But one factor is it's just been a long time. So he was 17 and 22 years have passed. He's 39 years old. I'll tell you, anybody looks a lot different between 17 and 39, right? So just those years themselves would have been a factor in why they didn't recognize him, but we'll talk more about that in a minute. But it had been 22 years since he'd seen his brothers. The author asks, show how that prophecy was fulfilled in this. All right, so notice in verse 6, it says, Joseph's brethren came and bowed down themselves before him with their faces. Okay, go back to 37. In chapter 37, one of the things that enraged his brothers toward Joseph was, chapter 37, verse 5, Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet more. And he said to them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I have dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And behold, your sheaves stood round about and made obeisance to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed reign over us, or shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? And they hated him yet more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed yet another dream, and behold his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. And behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and his brethren, and his father rebuked him and said, What is this dream that thou hast dreamed? Shall I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee in the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. I mean, this is not even a figurative fulfillment of that dream. This is a literal fulfillment. They actually are bowing down to Joseph. And so the dream has a very specific and literal fulfillment here in them coming to Egypt and bowing down to him. Now, give me some more thoughts about why they didn't recognize Joseph. They clearly didn't. It actually says to him, Joseph knew his brethren, but they knew him not, verse 8. Tom?
They sold him into Egypt as a slave. They weren't expecting him to be in a place of prominence.
All right. So expectation, right? They didn't even expect to see him alive. Certainly they didn't expect him to see him as top-ranking official in Egypt. And so I think Tom is exactly right. Expectation plays a part in what we perceive, right? This morning in the sermon, we're going to talk about the resurrection of Jesus. But you know, when we study the resurrection, one of the things is that the apostles did not expect to see a resurrected Jesus. Even though he had been foretelling it, their expectation was, when the women went out to the tomb on the first day of the week to do what? They thought his body would still be there, and they were going to anoint it with additional spices. They were not expecting, even though Jesus had said it would happen, they were not expecting a resurrection. And so if you don't expect something, you don't. It's hard to realize it because of expectation. Josh?
Well, another thing is Pharaoh has renamed him. Also, they're not calling him Joseph. He's giving him Egyptian clothes to wear.
You think he's walking like an Egyptian?
Right? Yeah, exactly. It's not like they said, "Hey, go talk."
He's got one of those crazy hats on. Yeah. Almost certainly, he's got one of those crazy hats on, right?
That's in his position. That's what he would have worn. I mean, the officials wore a completely different type of dress than just a regular person.
That's right. By his dress, by his manner. And we'll read later that he's not speaking to them in Hebrew. He understands what they're saying, but he's speaking through an interpreter to them. So he's not even speaking to them in their own language. Everything's different. Tom?
You just take the time. Have you ever gone back to your hometown and met up with one of your friends that you haven't seen for, 22 years?
Yeah.
They don't look like they were when they were 17 years old.
Absolutely.
I don't look like I was when I was 17 years old.
Yeah.
There are different things. And then there's dress and hygiene type differences too. Sort of shown that the Egyptians didn't wear a lot of facial hair and the Hebrews did.
Yeah.
There's a good possibility that Joseph was probably clean shaven and, except for maybe that, sort of beard that the Egyptian men wore and stuff. So when you go back and you look at all their tombs and sculptures and everything, the Egyptians were more clean shaven. The Hebrews and the Canaanites, were not.
If you went to Washington, D.C., and you had an appointment with some high-ranking government official in Washington, D.C., and unbeknownst to you, it was a classmate from high school who has this high position, there's a possibility you wouldn't recognize them because you didn't expect, that guy was just a guy you ran around with in high school, and now he's holding high rank in Washington, D.C. there's a chance you wouldn't recognize him, even though he'd be dressed in the same kind of clothes we dress. You put all these puzzle pieces together, and it's absolutely no surprise that Joseph's brothers didn't recognize him. He knew them, because the chances are, of course, remember, he's the younger brother. So his brothers were older than him. And so, although they've also aged 22 years, probably the age change wasn't as dramatic. For instance, in Reuben, who was the oldest, probably the age change wasn't as dramatic in them. Plus, they said they're from the land of Canaan. So, they sort of identified where they've come from. I do not, I'm saying all that to simply say I don't think there's any surprise that Joseph recognized them, but they didn't recognize him. Any other thoughts on that section of verses? Really interesting story, isn't it? Let's keep reading there at verse 9. We're in chapter 42 at verse 9. And Joseph remembered the dreams which he dreamed of them, and said to them, Ye are spies, to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said unto him, Nay, my lord, but to buy food are thy servants come. We are all one man's sons. We are true men. Thy servants are no spies. And he said to them, Nay, but to see the nakedness of the land ye are come. And they said, Thy servants are 12 brethren, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan. And behold, the youngest is this day with our father, and one is not. And Joseph said to them, That is it that I spake to you, saying, Ye are spies. Hereby ye shall be proved. By the life of Pharaoh ye shall not go forth hence, except your youngest brother come thither. Send one of you, and let him fetch your brother, and ye shall be kept in prison, that your words may be proved, whether there be any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh surely ye are spies. And he put them all together into ward 3 days. And Joseph said to them the third day, This do, and live, for I fear God. If ye be true men, let one of your brethren be bound in the house of your prison. Go ye, carry corn for the famine of your houses, but bring your youngest brother unto me, so shall your words be verified, and ye shall not die. And they did so. And they said one to another, We are verily guilty concerning our brother, in that we saw the anguish of his soul when he besought us, and we would not hear. Therefore is this distress come upon us. And Reuben answered them, saying, Spake I not to you, saying, Do not sin against the child? And ye would not hear. Therefore, behold, also his blood is required. And they knew not that Joseph understood them, for he spake unto them by an interpreter. And he turned himself about from them, and wept, and returned to them again, and communed with them, and took from them Simeon, and bound him before their eyes. All right, so the author asked the question, I think we see it in this reading, that Joseph's questioning seemed intended to bring out the feelings of his brethren. How are they feeling about how all this family business has transpired? And I think he gets his answer there in the last verses which we read, especially in verses 21 through 24. They're still feeling guilty about what they did to Joseph. And Reuben even said, I told you, didn't I tell you not to sin against the child? They remember, all of the brethren, it says in verse 21, says they remember the anguish of his soul when he besought us. We would not hear. There's a little more information there about the selling of him into slavery that the original account doesn't tell us. He was begging them for mercy. He was begging them not to do this to him, which is completely understandable. I mean, there's no surprise in that at all. But here, his brothers remember the anguish that he expressed as they were selling him into slavery. You got to imagine that, although when he ended up being a slave in Potiphar's house, he was treated, he was elevated and given responsibilities over everything because he was such a good worker. But I mean, slaves, how would you like it? I'm not going to tell you any details about who you'll be a slave to, but we're going to sell you today into slavery. Does that, just does the notion of that convey good prospects in your mind? Well, absolutely not, right? I don't care what I end up having to do. I don't want to be a slave, right? And so Joseph knew, because I imagine typically the condition for slaves in those times was horrible. And Joseph anticipated that and begged them not to sell him. And they wouldn't listen. And Reuben said, I told you. Didn't I tell you? Don't do anything to the kid. And you wouldn't listen to me. And now, basically, the thought of it is now, all of this is happening to us because of that. So they still felt very guilty. And they even imagined that they were suffering consequences because of what they had done. Tom?
Joseph was asking information of them. They said, we are 12 brothers. One is home with my brother, and one no longer is. They thought he was dead.
Yeah. Well,
So the concept there is that, and here Joseph is who he is, and he knows that, well, no, they think I'm dead, but I'm alive.
and that goes to that expectation thing you were talking about a minute ago. Their expectation was he wouldn't possibly survive that long. It's been 22 years. He's been a slave for 22 years. He's almost certainly dead. They believed him dead. Yeah, exactly right. Matt?
I don't know what the head of these slave traders were, but their expectation probably was that he wouldn't have been in Egypt anyway, much less the leader of it. So what are the odds that they sold him in Egypt here? They're probably just, they may have been going somewhere else. They thought they'd be a slave in their homeland where they were going back to or something. But
Yeah, they wouldn't have any indication. Of course, I think the Midianite traders were on a caravan trip to Egypt, but they had no idea that he'd be sold there or where, or that he'd even make it that far. Yeah, there's no expectation on their part. What do you think, the author asks, what do you think about his special interest in Benjamin? Go and bring your youngest brothers. Monty?
He was wondering in his mind, since he was gone and they had sort of not liked him because he was the favorite son, well, Benjamin being the other daughter, the other son of his mother, the favorite wife, would probably have stepped up into the favorite son position. So I imagine they're wondering if Benjamin's been treated as bad as he has.
Okay.
Is he still alive? Has he been sold into slavery?
Yeah.
And what kind of ridicule and harsh treatment are they giving him?
Okay. So Benjamin, of course, Joseph and Benjamin are the two sons of Rachel. Joseph was overtly favored by Jacob. But as Monty says, it's not hard to imagine that Benjamin probably would have enjoyed that same kind of preferential treatment from his father. And in fact, the very fact that he wasn't sent with the others indicates some preferentiality, I would think. He's afraid something will happen to him if something happens to him, So he's all worried about something happening to Benjamin because Benjamin's the only remaining son of his favorite wife, Rachel. But Joseph wants to know. That's it. That's his only full brother, right? These others are half brothers to him. Same father, different mothers. But Benjamin is his full blood brother. And I think there'd be a natural interest in it. But then because of the family dynamic that has been demonstrated over and over again, I think as Monty said, he'd be wondering how's Benjamin fared all these many years. Tom?
That's what I was going to say. Here, Benjamin is actually Joseph's full brother.
Yeah.
So he has a relationship with him. Even when they're coming out from Haran and comes down, Benjamin and Joseph, are kept back.
Yeah.
So,
when he first came back to meet Esau. Yeah, exactly right. All right, any other thoughts here or comments? It's a pretty straightforward telling. I don't think there's any difficulty in understanding these verses, but it sure is interesting. And this just sort of reads like a novel or a short story, doesn't it? I mean, the details of it are just intriguing. Let's keep reading at verse 25. Then Joseph commanded to fill their sacks with corn and to restore every man's money into the sack and to give them provision for the way, and thus did he unto them. And they laded their asses with corn and departed thence. And as one of them opened his sack to give his ass provender in the inn, he espied his money, for behold, it was in the sack's mouth. And he said to his brethren, my money is restored, and lo, it is even in my sack. And their heart failed them, and they were afraid, saying one to another, what is this that God hath done to us? And they came to Jacob their father unto the land of Canaan, and told him all that befell them, saying, the man who is Lord of the land spake roughly to us, and took us for spies of the country. And we said to him, we are true men, we are no spies. We be 12 brethren, sons of our father. One is not, the other, and the youngest is this day with our father in the land of Canaan. And the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, Hereby shall I know that ye are true men. Leave one of your brethren here with me, and take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And bring your youngest brother unto me. Then shall I know that ye are no spies, but that ye are true men. So will I deliver your brother, and ye shall traffic in the land. And it came to pass, as they emptied their sacks, that behold, every man's bundle of money was in his sack. And when both they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. And Jacob their father said unto them, Me have ye bereaved of my children. Joseph is not, and Simeon is not, and ye will take Benjamin away. All these things are against me. And Reuben spake to his father, saying, Slay my 2 sons, if I bring him not to thee. Deliver him into my hand, I will bring him to thee again. And he said, My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If mischief befall him by the way in the which ye go, then shall ye bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. And so, one of the questions was asked, how does this whole storyline illustrate the principles spoken in Numbers 32:23? Numbers 32:23 is a famous expression, be sure your sin will find you out, right? How often have we heard that? How often has that concept been included in our sermons and our teaching? Be sure your sin will find you out. You know, you think you can do something and keep it covered up. We've all done that. We've all done that. I did this, and I don't want anybody to know about what I did. And we think we can keep our sins private. The fact of the matter is your sin will find you out. And very often that's here and now, right? In this lifetime, our sins find us out. You're usually not real successful at keeping things secret. Usually it gets out one way or another. And of course, ultimately, even if you were, let's assume that you could keep secret a sin that you did for the rest of your life. No one ever discovered it. As I was saying, the probabilities of that are pretty low, but let's say you could. It's possible. In judgment, of course, it will all be revealed and made manifest. So there's no hiding our sins. But this storyline is a pretty good illustration of your sin will find you out. Joseph's brothers are now feeling the full guilt of their trespass. And it's not going to be kept secret. It's all going to be exposed here as this continues to unfold. So your sin will find you out. And then our author also asks us how this storyline illustrates Romans 12, verse 17. Romans 12:17 says, Recompense to no man evil for evil. Well, the illustration of that is in Joseph, right? He could have, don't forget the powerful position that he holds right here. He could have had them all killed on the spot. I mean, he has the power. He doesn't have to answer to anybody else about it. He could have said, These men are spies from the land of Canaan, cut their heads off. And that's a done deal right there. And there didn't have to be any process of justice here. He has that authority, and he could have just had them all killed, executed on the spot, without any he wouldn't even have to explain himself to anybody. He has that kind of power in Egypt, but he didn't do it. And so Joseph, as we're going to see, is living by the principle, recompense to no man evil for evil. So you've been done bad? That guy really mistreated me. I'm going to get even with him. He'll be sorry for what he did. I'll do to him 10 times worse than he did to me. Of course, that's sort of the law of carnal man, isn't it? Get even. Make it worse for them than what they did to me. And that's not the kind of people God wants us to be. And so Joseph is a good illustration of that. So he could have certainly done them bad. He hasn't done them anything bad. And he's not going to. But I would say, though, that Joseph's conduct toward his brother may have been along the lines of getting them to acknowledge their sinfulness. Getting them to admit that what they did was wrong. We don't know because the story jumps 22 years. We don't know what his brothers have been talking about for this 22 years that have transpired. But don't you imagine that this was probably a thing you don't talk about much. Don't bring it up. Their father doesn't know. Nobody else in the household knows. They know. They all know. But I've got to believe they didn't bring this up among themselves. They just kind of wanted to forget that. Put that behind you. Forget about that. Put that in the past. Now it's front and center. But Joseph's questioning of them and his challenges to them is forcing them to come to grips with the reality of what they've done. And so in that sense, he didn't retaliate, but he did do some things that made them own up to their sin. Put some fear in them. Exactly right. Exactly right. Last question in that section was, would this chapter lead you to conclude that the years in which his brethren had been deceiving his father about Joseph were happy years for them? I don't think so. I think they had suppressed guilt, don't you? Wouldn't you call it that? They obviously felt guilty. They obviously still remembered how Joseph begged them, "Don't sell me." It wasn't hard for them to bring those remembrances to the surface, and so they felt guilty, and they had been trying to suppress that guilt. When we try to suppress guilt, it doesn't work in the long run. In the long run, that's not going to be. It's not good. It's not good. It doesn't solve the problem, but it's also not healthy for us to suppress guilt rather than deal with guilt, deal righteously with guilt. They were suppressing the guilt, and it clearly was not a really happy thing. So Joseph is in Egypt, and he's saying, don't come back here without Benjamin. And Jacob is saying, no way. There's no way you're taking him down there. Notice he fears something will happen to him. If something happens to him, notice he says there in verse 38, he is left alone concerning Benjamin. He's my only son by Rachel. He's the only one. If mischief befall him, by the way, in the which you go, then shall you bring down my gray hairs with sorrow to the grave. If something happened to him, I don't know what I would do. I would just die. It'd kill me. If something happened to Benjamin, it would just kill me. All right. Let's read the first part of the next chapter. We probably won't get to comment on it all. So they make another trip. But it takes a while for Jacob to agree to let them go. Verse 43, and the famine was sore in the land. It's not getting any better. It's getting worse. The famine is sore in the land. And it came to pass when they had eaten up the corn which they had brought out of Egypt, their father said to them, go again, buy us a little food. And Judah spake to him, saying, the man did solemnly protest unto us, saying, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. If thou wilt send our brother with us, we will go down and buy thee food. But if thou wilt not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, ye shall not see my face, except your brother be with you. And Israel said, wherefore dealt ye so ill with me, as to tell the man whether ye had yet a brother? And they said, the man asked us straightly of our state and of our kindred, saying, is your father yet alive? Have ye another brother? And we told him according to the tenor of these words. Could we certainly know that he would say, bring your brother down? And Judah said unto Israel his father, send the lad with me, and we will arise and go, that we may live and not die, both we and thou, and also our little ones. I will be surety for him. Of my hand shalt thou require him. If I bring him not unto thee, and set him before thee, then let me bear the blame forever. For except we had lingered, surely now we had returned this second time. And their father Israel said unto them, if it must be so now, do this. Take of the best fruits in the land in your vessels, and carry down the man a present, a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, almonds, and take double money in your hand, and the money that was brought again in the mouth of your sacks, carry it again in your hand. Peradventure it was an oversight. Take also your brother, and arise, go again unto the man, and God Almighty give you mercy before the man, that he may send away your other brother and Benjamin. If I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Okay. So Reuben had initially said, you can kill my two sons if send Benjamin with us, and if I don't bring him back, you can kill my two sons That didn't sell Jacob on the deal. He didn't agree. And so time has passed. They've eaten up all the food. They're starving again. Now, this is really a bad famine. They're going to die. They don't have anything to eat. And so finally Judah says, Jacob says, go again, get us some. No, Judah says, I'm not going. We are not going. We're just not going. If you don't agree to let Benjamin go, we are not going. The guy was real plain about this. You will not see my face unless your younger brother comes with you. There's no use going. It's a wasted trip, and probably we'll all end up being imprisoned or killed. We are just not going. We are not going without Benjamin. And he said, and then he says further, I will be surety, or I will be the guarantee of his safety, and you can take it out on me if it doesn't turn out right, but we have got to take him, or we're all going to die here. And so you might as well let it happen, because we're going to die one way or the other. You might as well let us take him. And so Jacob finally relents and says, okay. It's interesting to me that they had a few things left. Notice, he says, take with you the best fruits in the land, carry a present, a little balm, a little honey, spices, myrrh, nuts, almonds. Those would have just been probably some things they had on the pantry shelf, so to speak, things that they had laid back. And notice he says a little. They didn't have a lot of that. Take him a few of these things as a present. So even though the famine was great, they still had, but these are all the kind of things that could have been preserved. Remember, they were they're still within the first 2 years. They're still within the first 2 years of that famine. So it wouldn't have been too hard to imagine. You might still have a jar of honey on the shelf, a few almond nuts on the shelf. That's not impossible to believe that they could have still, because those are not life-sustaining kind of things, right? Spices. Those are not the kind of things that you sustain life with. And so they may have still had a few of those kind of things left on the shelf, but they don't have food. They do not have what sustains life. And they need it, and they need it bad. And he says, also take your money with you. Take a double portion. Take money for this trip and take the money from the last trip. It may have been an oversight. That may have been a mistake that they didn't keep your money when they filled your bags. Take that money back and take the money for this trip and go back and buy us food so we can survive. And so he sends Benjamin. He basically says, if I'm bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. If it happens, it happens. And so you got to think that probably specifies how severe the famine was, that he has changed his mind now because he realizes it has to happen or else. All right, everybody, Lord willing, we'll continue the story there next week.